Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle. Thank you for joining me at sonic-cinema.com as well as YouTube, the Sonic Cinema podcast. Today we continue the class of 1999 discussion with one of the masters of filmmaking, Martin Scorsese's uh, drama with Nicolas Cage, Bringing Out the Dead. And to discuss the film, I'm joined once again by writer, director, producer Brian Ackley. Brian, good to talk to you again.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me back, man. I'm looking forward to this.
So when Bringing Out the Dead first came out, when did you see Bringing Out the Dead for the first time?
This I saw, I suppose VHS. VHS was a thing back then.
Yeah.
This would have been 2 years after I graduated high school. Um, I remember, as far as the time period goes, I just kind of remember seeing the trailer
Mm-hmm.
and being mesmerized. In fact, I'm surprised I didn't get to see this in the theater because I was so excited. The
Yeah.
film itself ended up being a letdown because I was so excited. The trailer just
Mm-hmm.
sucked me in. I mean, all those characters. So, I don't. I think I would have remembered if I did see it in the theater.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that you were let down by the movie because that actually kind of mirrors my own personal first impression with the movie. Like you, I love the trailers. I really was looking forward to the movie, and was when I was first really starting to get into Scorsese as a filmmaker. I'd seen most of his big classics by then, and was really looking forward to seeing a new film with it of his. And my mom and I actually saw it in the theater together because she wanted to see it as well, and we were kind of let down as well. Partially, I think part of the reason at the time was it wasn't as just crazy. It didn't seem as crazy entertaining as the trailer made it sound.
Yeah,
But also it was just it was very depressing movie to watch. And it wasn't
yeah, it
until and
certainly is a somber film.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I watched it again for the first time since then a few years ago for a movie week on Sonic Cinema, and I had greater appreciation. But I mean, by this point, I've seen a lot more of Scorsese. I've come to respect a lot more of Scorsese's work, in particular stuff like his collaborations with Paul Schrader, Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, uh, Goodfellas, Last Temptation of Christ, Kundun, and it was shortly before Silence came out that I rewatched Bring Out the Dead, and so I was so by now watching it again for the podcast, I definitely I definitely feel a bit closer to a bit more understanding of what exactly Scorsese is doing. In a way, this is very much like Goodfellas, or sorry, not Goodfellas, Taxi Driver. But as opposed to somebody who it and like Travis Bickle, who doesn't really see much good in the world, Nicolas Cage is kind of the same way, except he's somebody who very much wants to help people.
Yeah, yeah. That is a very cool aspect of the film. You would kind of expect the opposite, given all of the madness and the energy and the drugs and everything. You'd expect the opposite, but this character, Nicolas Cage's character, he is a very compassionate person. There's a reason he's an EMS
Mm-hmm.
driver. Uh, so and yeah, he's very much interested in humanity,
Yeah.
and so it makes it all the more tragic when he finds himself
Mm-hmm.
stuck, and sort of dragged down even.
Yeah, and the thing about Frank Cage's character Frank in the movie is the fact that it's like part of the reason he is so burned out throughout the entire movie is that it feels like for him it's been a long time since he's really been able to save somebody. Like
Well, it's
usually
like
he's
I think it's 6 months,
yeah,
and that six
it's been a
is long.
while.
Yeah,
So
especially for someone who cares so passionate about what he
yeah.
does. That's the reason why he got into that line of work.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so the fact that that is the fact that he has a job where it's his it's his mission in life to basically try help people. The fact that he hasn't been able to is, I mean, you can understand completely that why he is the way he is, and it's like you understand very quickly before you even really get to know him on a deeper level throughout the film.
Yeah, it allows you to connect with him, which is it would almost seem like a strange role for Cage to
Mm-hmm.
to have because he's known for just more eccentric characters.
Yeah.
But in reality, it is very fitting for him because he has the emotional depth to
Mm-hmm.
play to play a so-called normal person. But then this normal person becomes crazy,
Yeah.
becomes as nutty as we'd expect Nick
Mm-hmm.
Cage to be in other films.
I mean, a big part of that is what he's gone through on the job, and the fact that he doesn't seem to sleep as much as he should, and with and just the situations he finds himself in, and the people he finds himself on the job with, from
Mhm.
John Goodman, Ving Rhames, and Tom Sizemore. You can see why the part that we associate with Nicolas Cage as a performer comes out, and it's weird because of the fact that it on the surface, yeah, this isn't, like you said, this isn't necessarily the type of character that you associate with Cage. But at the same time, enough you as you start to peel back the layers of the character, as you start to see him interact more with John Goodman, Ving Rhames, Tom Sizemore, everybody in this movie, you do start to see more of what we look at as the Nicolas Cage persona come out.
Yeah, and it's as if someone is going, crazy to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd say it's not only the characters are fantastic, and the characters
Yeah.
are certainly a very important part of um, sort of dismantling Frank, the character of Frank,
Mm-hmm.
but also visually, what Scorsese does, and I noticed this just from the start, is he's throwing lights at you. He's just
Yeah.
flaring, the ambulance lights right in your face.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that, and on top of that, there's a number of times when he's jumping around when we're entering a new sequence and fast forwarding through, he's also throwing the sirens on.
Yeah.
So it's a bombardment, and so there's a similarity between these eccentric characters, which become the characters become more eccentric as they go on. Like
Mm-hmm.
Tom is absolutely nuts,
Yeah.
and he's fantastic. And so he's like, these are like the lights that are blaring at you and the
Mm-hmm.
sirens going off. So it's a really cool combination of things that Scorsese is basically throwing us into to experience.
Yeah, and I think the first time, I think the first time how dark the movie is in terms of how depressing the movie is from a story standpoint, from how depressing Frank's character seems in terms of his inability to really do what he's
Oh yeah,
supposed to do as his job. I
he's
mean,
meant to do. He cares about.
that throws off just how crazy entertaining the movie actually is. I mean, you have
And
this very somber narration from Cage that really does set the tone well, and then opposite it, you start off with a Rolling Stones song at the beginning, and
yeah,
you start off and the way
yeah,
you brought up light and the way light and color work, and Robert Richardson's cinematography in this is just spectacular. The
yeah.
way the light and the way the color just comes out of what really seems like very pitch black uh, visuals otherwise.
Well, the word that you that you said that fits perfectly with the lighting is contrast.
Yeah.
The contrast that Frank's character, you know, his inner turmoil. He's a do-gooder who can't do anything,
Mm-hmm.
and so that contrast is huge. It's as clear as black and white. And this film itself is very dark, extremely dark. But then there's a lot of moments where white light pops out at you,
Yeah.
and I feel like there's one of the things are the jackets that the EMS guys wear.
Mm-hmm.
So it's when they come out of the ambulance for the first time, the white light is just popping out, and
Right.
for me, there's some kind of angelic feel,
Mm-hmm.
or association with that. Um, and so, but throughout, I mean, the contrast is there's absolute contrast, and not just vivid colors, but we're talking primarily darks and white and light.
Mm-hmm.
Very very interesting stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is that there's so much about this film. The more you start to watch it, that you real, and especially the more you start to experience Scorsese as a filmmaker, you really do. I mean, you could just. It's easy to say, you could just watch like Taxi Driver, Last Temptation of Christ, and see where this fits in terms of a larger picture of what Scorsese wants to say as an artist, as far as spiritual journeys that the characters go through. But it's not until you really start to dig in much deeper into his filmography and you basically start to watch a lot of his major films that you see why this spiritual journey not only is very similar to a lot of the other ones that he puts people through, whether it's in Silence, Last Temptation of Christ, Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, and even something like Goodfellas, versus something that's a bit darker and sort of like Shutter Island.
Yeah, yeah. I have not seen some of these titles that you mentioned. I have not seen Last Temptation, and I haven't
Mm.
seen Silence. How,
Oh,
how would how would you summarize a comparison between their themes and this film, if it's spiritually linked?
well, and I think certainly with actually, and it's funny. I have done with another filmmaker friend of mine. I actually did do a podcast on what I consider Scorsese's Faith trilogy with Last Temptation of Christ, Kundun, and Silence. And basically, one of the things that I think those all of those three movies have in common, certainly with something like Bringing Out the Dead from a spiritual standpoint, is the fact that they are all characters who are trying to figure out their place in their specific time, how they're best able to help people. And that's certainly the case with Willem Dafoe's Jesus and Last Temptation of Christ. He's getting he's getting these messages from God that he doesn't quite understand. He's basically going through the process that will eventually lead him to the cross. And he basically that is a spiritual journey that he's not he has a lot of self doubt there, very similar to what Frank goes through in this movie. The Dalai Lama in Kundun, he's somebody who very much is about peace, about being able to help people and spread love throughout the world, but he's caught in a time where the political ramifications of that, especially when it comes to China, he's not able to do that in the way, and he's not able to do that not only worldwide, but more importantly, with his own people. And he struggled, and to that movie leads to the point where he is exiled out of Tibet. And then with Silence, it's the story of two missionaries in um, Japan at a point where Christian missionaries are not looked upon fondly, and they're even persecuted. And so how are they supposed to spread this message of love and compassion in a in an environment that rejects their their faith? And so all of that, you see that, you put in that respect, and you look at Frank, and he's not necessarily the spiritual leader that those characters
Hmm.
are, but he's ultimately guided by a desire to help people, and the world around him is, for one reason or another, just not allowing him the ability to do so.
Yeah, exactly. That's very fascinating stuff. Where how would you rank perhaps the efficiency to which Scorsese is able to accomplish, or in other words, which are these the the better films, or which is your favorite film that tells that story?
I think Last Temptation is easily my favorite. I mean, I think part of that is because it's the one that I've seen the most. But also I think there's just, because of the fact that it basically, there while it follows the traditional story of Christ within the Bible, it does deviate. So because of the fact that there's so much about the story that we already know, and then we have Kazastanis and Schrader as one of the co-writers, and Scorsese bringing a new perspective onto it. I think it's arguably the most accessible, even if it is the most controversial. I think they're all actually very fascinating. I mean, a lot of people don't really think about Kundun a whole lot in the same perspective of Last Temptation, Silence, and really Scorsese's work as a whole, because it's, on the surface, it's so very radically different, and also because it's not really available right now. But because of but when once you start to look at it within the context of his larger work, in terms of what he's trying to do with the story of the Dalai Lama, it really does make more sense. All of them are completely worth watching if you can get your hands on them. Certainly. I mean, I Silence is probably the most challenging of them, partially because of how long it is, but also because of how difficult I think it is to it's kind of a difficult narrative, and because and it's not a bad thing. It's just very it's doesn't feel as accessible as something like Last Temptation or even Kundun, which does follow a very basic biopic structure in the script by Melissa Matheson. But Scorsese's Eye is what really kind of elevates that to along the same lines. It just kind of depends on, as far as which one is better. My personal pick is Last Temptation, but I mean, I could see other people choosing other films for a variety of reasons.
Well, and the similar question is, do you feel like he accomplishes what he wants to accomplish? Does the theme come through very strongly, and very compelling in all those films?
I think it does. I think to a certain extent, we're this is sort of where repeated viewings really help out. I mean, repeated viewings help out any movie, I think, and they help out our choices, our perspective, whether we end up really liking the movie or realizing that we don't necessarily like the movie. It's always good to be able to have that added those added viewings to really start to think about the movie on not only a cinematic level, but certainly a thematic
Oh,
level.
certainly. Yeah, once you have the story, the
You
the
know,
the surface,
yeah,
then you go a little bit deeper, pay attention a little bit to different things. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, Bringing Out the Dead. If you'd asked me like 5 years ago, I would have been like, yeah, I was a bit disappointed, and it's like I didn't really feel like it was up to snuff to for Scorsese. But if you ask me now, I would say, yeah, it's completely worthy of discussion. As I don't know if it's necessarily top tier Scorsese, but second, certainly second to third tier Scorsese.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, there's plenty of interesting things about it. Now, so as you're talking about these other films, it's I haven't seen Kundun either, and it's I was just kind of trying to think of why that may be, because I've seen many other Scorsese films, the films of his that tend to be faster paced,
mm-hmm.
more exciting. But I think because there's a link between these, and we can cross over this theme that you're talking about with the similarity in characters with that of Frank's in Bringing Out the Dead, and it may be that I am personally not as interested in that kind of story.
Mm-hmm.
You know how how people gravitate toward certain stories like a redemption or the love story.
Yeah.
That this story may not be a story that I'm drawn to, and it
Mm-hmm.
may also explain why I am not a one of the reasons why I don't like the film. There's plenty to like about the film, but there's also things. It's the film. The Bringing Out the Dead is very much a roller coaster,
Yeah.
and I find when it slows down for two reasons: the Patricia Arquette
Mm-hmm.
character and the subplot with her father John Burke, I think, and then of course the philosophical voiceover, and these are there's some qualities within
Mm-hmm.
that still work very well, but in general that story may not be appealing to me, so I may
Right.
have lost interest in that way.
Well, and I definitely think, and you brought up the Patricia Arquette subplot. And I mean, I do think to a certain extent, especially when it comes to her history as a junkie and her possibly tiptoeing back in there with what's going on with her father, I think that sort of loses focus of why that subplot matters in the film. Because ultimately it's like I like the fact that that because that's the first call that we see Frank go to is her father, and at first it looks like he's very much dead, and then all of a sudden he's he's got pulse and he's just hanging on to the cusp of living, and so
Well,
they take him to the
interestingly,
hospital.
he goes in and out. He goes
Yeah,
back and forth,
yeah,
living and dead. I mean, there's a parallel between that and the emotional state of Frank,
yeah.
who's losing a grip on his purpose, his
Mm-hmm.
reality.
Yeah, and so I think that part of the story with Patricia Arquette's definitely, I think it's important to Frank's story because, like you said, it goes back and forth very much, and Frank is very much invested in whether her father lives or dies, and he starts to have he's these sort of hallucinations of her father, talking to him,
Oh
and
yes, yeah.
especially like later on, basically saying, "No, please let me go. Please, you know, please, I want to go. I'm ready to die." And so I think that part of it with the father is important to Frank's story. I don't think the whole part of following her to a drug dealer and then you have the shootout and stuff like that, that part is not really that important. I mean, it feels more like the necessity of having a plot device and a plot
Yeah, and it
point as
also
opposed to just telling a story.
yeah, it also sets up the drug dealers, because
Yeah.
we go back there, and it continues the concern the concern of this drug that's out, this heavy
Mm-hmm.
drug
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, which
Uh,
they've established. Yeah, which we start to see more and more at some of the places that he's called out to, and some of the cases that he's called out to. Um, but yeah, I think to a certain extent that that sort of loses the focus a bit for the film. Um, overall, I overall I don't necessarily have I don't have a problem with the Patricia Arquette subplot, with the exception of the drug dealers and the drug being a concern so much. I think that's the part where it's like, well, it feels like they sort of lost sight of the story that they and felt like they needed some point of narrative to, just have something that would drive some sort of a plot to it, as opposed to just sort of living within Frank's piece of state of mind. And I
Hmm.
kind of get it to a certain extent, but at the same time, I think it it isn't as interesting as what's going on throughout the rest of the film.
I did I was able to go with that with in that direction pretty smoothly. I do like how they humanize these essentially drug dealers.
Yeah,
So there, there's some color there. It's not that that aspect is not black or white.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but
Because you did have the because you do have the scene late on in the movie where the drug dealers on the spike, and hanging on for
yeah,
the spike, and they're having to burn them off, and
and
Frank is
yeah,
having
yeah.
to, comfort him at that time and try to keep him focused so they can do their job.
They create a great moment. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
there's that setup for that because they create a couple great moments. This man is on the verge of dying,
Mm-hmm.
of dropping to his death, and the sparks that are coming out from the thing that they're using, the saw cutting the iron,
Yeah.
it has this effect of fireworks, and so of
Mm-hmm.
course throw in some actual fireworks too. And the Empire State Building, I think it's lit up, and there's this moment where he just appreciates the beauty of the city,
Yeah.
and I think Frank uh, feels that too. I think he accepts that moment also.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some beauty in that. Um, what was I wanted to back up a little bit because when we were talking about um, Burke, John Burke being
Mm-hmm.
in the hospital going back and forth, and Frank is particularly invested in saving
Yeah.
in this man come through, and as far as the plot goes, as far as the story goes, it makes a lot of sense to follow along with the Patricia Ark. Oh, Mary is
Yeah.
her name.
Yeah.
So follow along with Mary because of the emotional connection that he begins to feel for her, and so ultimately what he's supposed to do is let it go, and that's what Burke says to him.
Mm-hmm.
It's my time, let me go. I don't want to be saved. So he has to, not only does he have to come to grips with that in a personal place,
Mm-hmm.
but he has to come to grips with that with his daughter, with in the presence of his daughter,
Yeah.
whom he's growing to care about,
Mm-hmm.
and he sees her care for her father reflected obviously as well. So there's all this reason for him not to let go,
Mm-hmm.
yet that's exactly what he has to do. So narratively speaking, it makes a lot of sense to have the Mary
Yeah.
character.
Yeah.
I must say though, since we're speaking about Mary, I'm just not a fan, and this might be why this is definitely one of the reasons why I'm not crazy about the film, and that's I don't like Patricia Arquette in this film.
Hmm.
She has some genuine moments, some really nice moments,
Yeah.
but she's got too many moments that just don't ring true for me.
Hmm.
That uh, yeah, so that might be part of why when it slows down,
Yeah.
it really comes to a grinding halt at certain times.
Mm-hmm.
Do you like her in this film?
I think she's good. I wouldn't put up there with some of her best work. I mean, I think she's better in movies. I think she's better in something like True Romance or Boyhood. I think she was really good in
Oh
that.
yeah,
This one,
those are
this
great
one,
ones. Yeah.
she has her moments, like you say, but I mean, not somebody that really stands out particularly, especially when you compare her to Nicolas Cage, John Goodman, Ving Rhames, and Tom Sizemore. Like all
Yeah.
of them in this movie, those three, as the people that Cage rides with and drives with throughout these different nights of going out. Uh, I love that they each have their own particular personalities that you could see would drive Frank crazy.
Hmm.
There are particular things about each one that would drive Frank crazy, and you understand why he's like, "Oh, please, not another call. I don't need
Well,
another
and
call
you know
right
what?
now."
Such a great touch, especially with Tom Sizemore's character, who's named Tom. With Tom, we see him and we hear of him, so
Yeah.
we get a little bit of his reputation, and we see some of the madness in him.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes time for him to pair up with him, we understand, like, this is the last thing Frank wants, to ride
Yeah.
with Tom, for crying out loud.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I know. So I read the script in preparation to rewatching and talking, and I noticed that Scorsese introduced Marcus's character very very simple, so that he just as a presence. He's
Mm-hmm.
talking in the lounge with the few people that when the first time that we see him, so we know that he exists. I think he's spoken about in the movie and the book before that, but in the script, he's just basically kind of thrown in. So I thought that was a nice touch because we get a feel for the world that Frank lives in,
Mm-hmm.
including these characters that he kind of
Yeah.
passes by.
I can't remember. Marcus is the Rames character, isn't it?
Oh yes,
That's
yes,
being Rames character, who
yeah.
is just the scene where I think it's their first call together at the club, and
Okay.
I think it's like that's by far like probably my favorite scene in the entire movie, just the way it plays out. And it's like one of the great little touches I love about that is the fact that it's like they give they give Marcus the kids, you know, they give Marcus the kids the name that they know him as, which is IB banging.
Oh yes,
And
yeah.
then it's like, well, what's his actual name? And they say Frederick, and but he wants to call him Freddie, and then it's like, no, it's Frederick, and he just goes back to calling him IB banging when he's
Yeah, because
praying
that.
and over him, and it's like that's just one of my favorite touches in the entire movie. Just the fact, just that evolution of that scene with Marcus, where it's like, I yeah, I'd prefer to do this rather than call him that. And
Yeah,
if I
it's
can't call him
fantastic.
this, I'm gonna call him this.
It's exactly like that in the script. So that's all.
Yeah,
That's all, Paul. It's great.
yeah,
So
and the
I mean, there are a couple things that stand out in that scene. You have Frank is providing something. I mean, I don't know all the medical stuff that goes
mm-hmm,
along with this, but he's basically reviving the victim,
yeah,
and he whispers. Frank whispers to Marcus, like, "Okay, I'm giving him this, so he's going to be okay."
yeah,
And Mark takes the opportunity to call upon, sort of, he's got this moment where he sort of creates almost a sermon,
mm-hmm,
and he has everybody holding hands,
yeah,
and so he makes a miracle out of it, basically.
mm-hmm,
But even in the process of doing this, it's just like you said, one of these special touches. The camera is placed up
mm-hmm,
high, and
yeah,
Mark, not only is he looking up, but he's looking at the camera.
yeah,
So he's looking directly at us as he's praying to God. And of course, the victim, comes out of it, and then just all. I mean, it all flows very nicely.
mm-hmm,
But one of my favorite touches are the Scorsese push-ins,
yeah,
and one push-ins is after this happens, the guy gets up and he's kind of okay. His girlfriend's, he's like, "What happened?" And his girlfriend's like, uh, these guys saved your life or something, and she's walking him out, and then this other guy who's there, he turns around and says, you guys are miracle workers, or he says something to that effect, and Scorsese pushes in with the camera on Ving Rhames, and he's just looking super cool, you know. And he says, I got the line down here. What is this line that he says? It's let me find it. Oh, I can't believe I. Oh, here it is. He says, not us. First step is love. The second step is mercy. And only the audience really knows. I mean, it sounds very religious. It sounds, very, very spiritual. But what only the audience knows is that one of the dispatchers' names is Love. Mm-hmm. He happens to be mad. He happens to be in love with her, or at least obsessed with her. And the name of the hospital that they go to is Mercy, Our Lady of Mercy. Yeah. Which they call Misery most of the time. Yeah. So it's just a great moment. The other push in that is just fantastic, and it might be one of the things the film's remembered for, and that's the sort of the bouncer type guy. His name is Gris. He's an officer. Yeah. And he just kind of keeps track. He keeps the place cleared and monitored. And there's a scuffle. You know, they know him pretty well. There's a scuffle going on, and his famous push. There's a push in to a close up of him, and he's like, "Don't make me take my sunglasses off." Yeah, something to that effect. And he actually, it's played up. It's played up at least twice, I think. Mm-hmm. But that push in is just something Scorsese. I don't know if anyone does it better than Scorsese.
Oh no, I mean certainly not anybody recently. I mean, there might be other filmmakers and the past who do that really well, but yeah, certainly not anybody working right now. Yeah, I was actually just gonna mention Gris as being one of my other favorite supporting performances in the entire movie. It's like because you only see him when you're at the hospital, but he makes an impression every single time, and you just it's just one of those. It's one of those performances where he's there for one specific purpose, and that's just to entertain the heck out of you with a couple of lines of dialogue and a couple of specific moments, and that is definitely one of my favorite supporting characters in the movie. Although I will give a particular shout out to Martin Scorsese as the dispatcher. He's the main dispatcher. And just you can tell it's Martin Scorsese, like it's his voice through and through, and his delivery. It's basically like Martin Scorsese playing Martin Scorsese as an EMS dispatcher, and it's just wonderful to see him go back and forth with the characters in the ambulance.
Yeah, you can tell he's got a lot of fun with that too. Yeah. There's a drunk that nobody wants to deal with that pops up every few days, and he gets back on the radio to share the good news or the bad news that they're going to need someone to clean them up again tonight. Mm-hmm. So you could tell Scorsese enjoys that. It's a cute way to throw in a cameo for yourself.
Yeah, and I mean it's one of those things where it's like it's. There are a lot of like, and that's one of those little things that it's really easy to sort of just gloss over in a movie, but like I think that's one of the things that I really enjoy about the movie is that there are moments of really high dark entertainment, even maybe a little bit of dark humor into it, while also being very it's something that ultimately I think to a certain extent it certainly respects the moral dilemma, the spiritual dilemma that Frank is in terms of his wanting to help people but inability to seemingly help people. And but it's also something that has a little bit of fun with it, with something like Scorsese is the dispatcher and the way the hospital is and the way the people in the ambulance are. It's it's one of those things that it finds it's not great balance, but it brings a little bit of balance uh to the way it handles that subject.
You know what may be a good example of that, of exactly what you're talking about, that balance. Um, there's well, when we are first going into the hospital, and
Mm-hmm.
this is just after we first see Gris, I believe, and he reluctantly lets Frank and Larry in,
Yeah.
and the door opens, it smashes on this guy's leg, this guy's broken leg, so
Mm-hmm.
he's crying out in pain, and it's the idea of these two extremes. This is the hospital itself is a maddening place. It's a
Yeah.
very chaotic place, and kind of, I don't know if it's scary, but just a there's just a lot of negative emotions
Yeah.
associated. And here you have someone who's injured, so you can feel for him, but at the same time you're laughing at this moment. So
Yeah.
it's a crazy duality, and it's handled within, what's also amazing, it's handled within a sense of realism.
Mm-hmm.
It that could easily happen, and that could easily be both horrifying, upsetting, at least upsetting, and funny at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is one of those things where it's yeah, and you you talk about a lot of the different things, and that it's like you have Mark Anthony's character who is known to marry Patricia Arquette's character, and he's the one begging for water, right?
Oh,
In the
Noel
emergency
is
room.
begging. Noel is begging for
Yeah.
water. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
what's his? Is that his real name?
Yeah,
What?
the actor is Mark Anthony.
Okay.
And yeah, but yeah, Noel was asking for water, and he's like, "Can we get this person some water?" It's like, no, he's not supposed to have water because he's he could he could get worse off. But yeah, just moments like that, and you're absolutely right as far as having, because to a certain extent is very much the 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 emergency room in this movie is to a certain extent is kind of a horror show. It is kind of a nightmare version of what we think of as the emergency room. And but there's also moments in there where it's there's just a bit of an absurd uh and it's an absurd amount of entertainment that can be found there. And there, like you said, there are little moments that Scorsese finds that is where that's applicable.
Yeah,
So
exactly. There are those moments. There's a nurse that we're greeted to as soon as we come rolling in on the
yeah,
stretcher, and she's the one that handles a lot of the well, the drug addicts
yes,
and alcoholics, and she's got a very interesting way of telling them, get the hell out of here.
yeah,
Like, well, why should I help you? You're just gonna go back and do the same thing.
yeah.
That was, and yeah, that's all Schrader too. I mean, it's really a great script
Hmm.
that they started with.
Yeah, and then there's also Frank's boss who keeps
Oh
saying, "Oh, I'll
yeah.
fire you tomorrow. I'll fire you tomorrow. I
Oh
really
man,
need
I
you
love
today.
that
I'll
dynamic.
fire you tomorrow."
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
there's scenes together where it's like you kind of feel for Frank because it's like you understand why he's like, please just fire me. I can't do this anymore. It's,
Yeah.
but
You get the impression that their supervisor wouldn't even fire. Who's the one that flipped over the ambulance? Was that Ving Rhames? Was
that was
that Mark?
Marcus. Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
that was Marcus.
You get the
Um,
impression. Oh yeah, when you have time, I need, fill out some forms.
yeah,
But yeah. So I need you. So and
yeah.
so didn't, and so I need you.
But I mean, it also, that's also one of those moments where it could also be commentary on just how rough that life is because of the fact that it's like, I can't fire you even though I probably should because of the fact that I still need you to be able to work because I don't have enough people to work.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I think
um,
what's amazing again is the idea that they can pull off something like that character, in a realistic way.
yeah,
because it's part of a lot of it has to do with the actor, the character he plays him with the compassion.
Mm-hmm.
He is a softie, and
Yeah.
we all know people. I'd probably be the same or similar way at least. If someone's under me and they're screwing up, it's like, well, I need you, but
Mm-hmm.
also I like you. So,
Yeah.
and also I don't want to hurt your feelings. So there's three reasons why, here you go, just take the keys.
Yeah. um I mean, I don't know if I really have a whole lot of. I mean, well, actually, we haven't talked about part of the reason that Nicolas Cage's character is so drained with this particular job, and that's this character of Rose that is somebody who died on him a
That's
few
right.
months before, and we occasionally see her in we see her face, and we see her, her spirit just, you know saying, "Why did you fail me, Frank?" so many times.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where this is, it's like this is their way of showing this is what's haunting Frank. This is why this is part of why Frank is so burned out, and this is why he needs to be able to save somebody, because of the fact that he couldn't save Rose, and so this has sort of led him into a spiral where he's hasn't been able to save anybody.
Yeah, I think it's a great narrative and visual ploy.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts off small, like we're introduced to we may be introduced to the idea of Rose first, but then
Yeah.
we first see her on one face, and then we see Frank sees her here, then there,
Mm-hmm.
and at some point, there's a really cool shot that her face is superimposed on several characters that are turning around, and everyone in the street is her.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, it's very haunting. There's a now aside from that, there's a really cool sequence where Frank is in this surreal reality, and he's in the streets. I think they're even cobblestone, but it's part of the dream sequence when he falls asleep, having taken some sleep aid or some drug,
Yeah.
and he's pulling ghosts out of the
Yes.
pavement.
Yes.
And it's a very cool visual, of what he's going through. He's trying to save
Mm-hmm.
people. He's trying to save ghosts,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where the spiritual journey is. And I think that's one of the things I didn't necessarily appreciate the first time that I saw, is that I didn't I wasn't necessarily as conscious of films that did this type of spiritual journey, where so much of it is internal with the characters, and being able to just follow that without like specific plot points along the way. I think
Mhm.
that's one of the things that really threw me when I first saw it. But certainly the past, I certainly like it more now. I think it's a good film. I don't, like I said, I don't necessarily think it's upper tier Scorsese. But I mean, I think it's a good film, and it definitely fits into a larger it fits into a larger part of his work than maybe,
Yeah, it's definitely worth
maybe audiences didn't pick up on at first.
looking into further.
Yeah.
Even there's one thing. I mean, Scorsese just simply knows what he's doing, especially this far into his career.
Yeah.
One of the things that's really cool about the lighting is this happens, at least twice, one interior, one exterior. Well, kind of throughout, but in terms of a sequence where characters are walking through,
Right.
there's the drug dealer's apartment. This is where at first Mary goes in, and then he waits. Then he comes, and she's not there, and then he discovers she's sleeping.
Yeah.
Um, so there are um, there are pockets of light that fall from the sky,
Mm-hmm.
and because it's white light, It's so starkly contrasting to the setting itself, and the characters walking in and out of this white light. It's very it makes me think of these like a direct portal to heaven.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely spiritual, and so you get the same sort of visual scheme um, when at some point I okay it's when Frank and Tom are they get a call to go to someone who's tried to kill himself, the
Mm-hmm.
guy who's slit his wrist but he didn't know how to do it.
Yeah.
And so we're introduced to the scene by a white horse, which I'm not sure how significant that is. Of course, it's significant in some way. But then as they're walking through the scene, because it's an outdoor setting of all these it's just sort of like a homeless congregation,
Right.
makeshift area. Maybe it was an abandoned building, but I think it was under an old set of train rails, but they're the same idea that just drops of light.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I just thought that was one of the cooler ways to to connect the characters, to connect the story with the that is the grounded with the spiritual, because it's like a just a visual of a portal of light,
Mm-hmm.
and then but then you can see um, at different spots you see that the actors tend to be there's a lot of backlight and a lot of that light tends to be white and it tends to drop from high above, um, so and this is all this is all the filmmaking.
Yeah.
These aren't accidents,
Mm-hmm.
so there's so many things like the lighting and like the music and the choice of music
Yeah.
that's worth studying to try to figure out what exactly is he doing. So I would agree with you. It's certainly maybe second tier Scorsese. It's certainly not a throwaway film. Even
Right.
as much as the parts that I don't like, that is beside the point. It's
Mm-hmm.
still there's enough to get from it.
Even if this is second tier Scorsese, though, I would say this is probably first upper tier Nicolas Cage performance, though. And
Oh, you said you would say it would be
I would
upper.
say it's upper tier Nicolas Cage. I think this, it probably isn't quite in the top performances, but it's definitely up there, and it's definitely one where it's sort of like his performance in Bad Lieutenant, the one that Werner Herzog did about a decade ago, where it's like you kind of would like to see him collaborate again with these people. I would love to see another. I would love to see what another Nicolas Cage, Martin Scorsese uh, movie look like. Just
Mhm.
same way I would like to see what another Werner Herzog and Nicolas Cage movie would look like. It's like there's something about those filmmakers that Nicolas Cage is giving to them. I mean, you see it in adaptation too with Spike Jones and what Nicolas Cage is able to do with that character. And
Yeah.
going back to the filmmakers we first talked about in this year being John Malkovich, but it's it's one of those things where it's like I think this is there's so many shades of so many people look at Nicolas Cage now and they just dismiss him outright because of all of the direct to video and action movies and stuff like that, but you it, all of that stuff clouds the fact that you forget that he to where you forget that he's a really good underrated actor, and he's probably one of the most interesting ones when he's on the top of his game. I mean, I think here he certainly is.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think he's so perfectly fit. I think what a role like this, you could see Nicolas Cage flipping out half the time,
Yeah.
but he's subdued largely. In fact, when he does have a flip, it's not a flip out. They're just they're somewhat wild moments.
Yeah.
And they were in fact he's so controlled in the film that they're funny and they're just perfectly fit when they
Mm-hmm.
happen. And um,
Yeah, they don't
yeah,
feel outplaced. They don't feel outplaced because you understand the mindset that Frank's in,
Yeah.
And so it's like it's perfectly understandable that he's going to flip out at times for one
Yeah.
reason or another, whether it's something that his coworkers do, whether it's something that he sees on a job, whether it's having to deal with that homeless man again for the fourth time this week.
Yeah, exactly. Well, my favorite one is toward the end, and everything's speeding up, visually speaking. Just fast forward actions. The cars are zipping through and we're in the cab with Frank and with Tom,
Yeah.
and even their action, they're not doing anything, but their heads are going like this because the film is moving at
Mhm.
10 times the speed, and then you get them from the side, and then Nick Cage has this look where he just kind of looks over and is with this crazed look on
Yeah.
it in his eyes,
It's a very
and
Nick Cage
because
look.
I think
Yeah.
I think what's his name? I think Tom asks him if he's okay,
Yeah.
and he's like, "What? Yeah," and he's just raring to go. So it's like that the right control over a character can create
Mhm.
moments like that make sense, and they're over the top and appropriately.
Yeah.
Uh, but then of course um, Tom Sizemore um, may do him up in this film because he's got one of my favorite freakouts. When at the end, when it's time, when we're wrapping things up,
Mhm.
uh, and Nick and Frank is leaving the hospital, he passes Tom, who's beating the crap
Yeah.
out of the
The
ambulance.
ambulance, yeah.
Yeah, because he's got all this pent-up rage that he wasn't able to take out on Noel,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
he's just unleashing this rage. It's crazy.
Yeah, and those three supporting performances by Sizemore, Rames, and Goodman, who we haven't really talked about a lot, but I mean, this is a performance by Goodman that really shows you how just brilliant he can be in a very small role and how
Hmm.
much of an impact he can have on a movie. I mean, there's certainly other examples of that. I mean, he's done that for the Coen Brothers before. He's done that in several other movies, but yeah, it's one of those things where it's like though those three performances, they're really great in the way that they complement Cage's performance, but also
Absolutely,
they
yeah.
tell little stories on their own of who those characters are.
They're great New York City characters too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Well, before we wrap it up, do you have anything more that you'd like to say on Bring Out the Dead?
I have I have well, I've got two questions for you.
Okay.
Two things that just stood out about the film that I haven't been able to figure out for myself. Um, One thing is specific. So the specific thing is that at some point, Frank invites Mary into the he invites her into the to the ambulance to take her back home.
Yes.
And I don't remember the song that's playing, but there's a shot that plays out. It's a two shot
Mm.
where they're sitting quietly in the back of the. And I don't know if they hear the music also or not. It could be that the radio's playing it, but it's because it's such a long thing. In fact, I think there's also a rack focus because they're not equal. I think she's closer to the
Hmm.
camera, he is, but the camera is on it for maybe 15, maybe up to 15 seconds.
Yeah.
And there are different expressions, especially on Mary's face. So I don't know if they're trying to introduce the idea of the two of them coming together of a potential romance. You might think that because she kind of gives a smirk at some point,
Mm-hmm.
but there's other emotions going on in her
Yeah.
and on him. Like they're not playing up a. I don't
Yeah, I
know.
don't really remember. I don't really remember that scene. I would have to go back and rewatch it for myself to see how I feel about that. Because it's like I think I remember the moment I sort of remember the moment you're talking about because it's after they first take her father to the hospital, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so it's
In
early
fact,
on.
she may. Yeah, I
Um,
don't remember where it comes in real. And
yeah, I'd have to
oh,
rewatch.
he it's somewhere in the middle because he's driving around with Marcus at this point, and Marcus asks her like, what's this? And
Oh,
you know,
okay.
in a very tight, in a back and forth, two tight shots, and he's like, this is, you know, I brought the her father in. He's not doing so well. Just what?
Oh,
And
okay.
he says, oh, you're falling for her, Frank. Not good. Um, and then he's like, well, I'm also hungry. We can get something to eat after this. Oh, you're,
Mhm.
yeah. So there's a moment between the two of them, but
Okay.
uh, well, that's okay. If you happen to review the film in the next, you know, couple months and you want to give me a shout out. Let me know what you
Okay.
think. The other question is more general, and it's a stylistic thing that Scorsese's doing with the camera when he's panning a lot. He's panning a lot and tilting a lot, and he's connecting um, um, a lot of shots together and a lot of action. So he could be on a close up, and then the camera drops down to the hand to show that the person's doing something with their hand,
Mhm.
and then it might come back up, or it might go somewhere else, or the camera may just go from one character to completely panning over to another character. And I'm not sure exactly what he's doing with this style. If he's
Hmm.
because it's connecting, if he's just trying to connect the whole the world all together, the characters all together,
Yeah.
or it's just trying to create. If it's just about the kinetic energy, because that's the
I
feel,
I
and
feel
it's,
like it's probably more about the energy. Cuz
yeah,
I mean, I there's a lot of this movie where there's a tremendous, to a certain extent, there, you know, and we've talked about how sort of depressing the movie can feel. You know,
hmm,
there we've also talked about how much energy the movie has. Like the beginning of that, the movie, you have the Rolling Stones playing, you have this quick you have these quick edits, you have these quick uh pans, shots, close ups, and all of that stuff that going on, and it's very frantic. So I think it
yeah,
is about developing the energy of this movie, and the, you know, even though the subject is very serious and the subject is very depressing in a lot of ways, it's about showing, and it's probably more reflective of just how he's showing the life of an EMT, and you know,
yeah.
so I mean, just
It
going
could also,
from one to another to another to another, and it's like that's because that's kind of the structure. It's like each of these uh trips that we go on with Frank.
yeah, I like that. Um, Also, I guess if this is if this is the case too, it could play into um, oh, I lost the thought. Well, okay, the idea of having, like like Frank has a will or passion,
Mm-hmm.
but he can't do anything with it.
Yeah.
So this energy, there could be an excess of energy that doesn't know what to do with itself. So that
Mm-hmm.
could be part of why he's chosen to
Yeah.
create this kind of energy,
Mm-hmm.
because you know there's a lot going on, but you're like, let's release somewhere. You know,
Yeah.
what do we do with this? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it could certainly be, could certainly be a visual reflection of how Frank's feeling too. In that respect, because I mean, he, you know, like we've talked about with Frank, it's like he's somebody who he very much wants to help people. He feels he needs to help people to a certain extent, but for some reason he's not able to, and just everything, he is just so burned out by his job because of his inability to save people the way he wants to save people and help people, that, you know, how is he going to be able to, how does he keep going? And it's like, I, yeah, I mean, I think that's a big part of the movie.
even on a lesser level, just as a human, um, in that job, when it's time to go, it's time to go.
Yeah.
So like because there are these moments when for whatever reason there's a lull in the narrative, and but then as soon as that call comes in, they pick up the pace, and those characters, like, you just have no choice. It's time to roll, and the film makes you do that.
Yeah.
Sirens are going, the lights are going,
Mm-hmm.
and before you know it, you're speeding down the street.
Yeah.
uh, yeah. All right, cool, man.
Well, it's good to talk to you again, and this is the second time we've talked about this year and this movie in general. I think we've got at least one more that we want to talk about somewhere down the line, and then we've got other things to talk about too, like the film that you wrote and produced recently, 2050, and yeah,
Oh,
I'm
that'd be
definitely
nice. Yeah, your ideas to get Princeton on,
yeah.
and that would be fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, and he actually just hit me up today, actually, after getting back from Cannes. So yeah, I mean that's something that I think that's something. It's one of the next things that I think I want to set up, not just for us, but I mean as far as the podcast is the three of us being able to talk about that film.
Yeah, we'll make it happen. It's always great talking to you.
Yeah. Well, Brian, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank Brian Ackley for joining me today to discuss Bring Out the Dead. We have at least one more 1999 film that we're going to discuss, Brian Helgeland's Payback. And we also have a film that he wrote and produced that we're hoping to talk about too, 2050. For now, that's it for the Sonic Cinema podcast. We've got more coming up with the class of 1999. As the summer goes on, I hope this is going to be the big area where I really am able to catch up with this series to where once the fall hits, I don't have a whole lot left to do as far as this one. It hasn't gone quite as quickly as I would hope, but with the Atlanta Film Festival and a lot of other stuff, production of these episodes sort of got held up a bit. Hit me up on patreon.com/SonicCinema for more. I actually just shared with people my early picks for what I would consider, what I would vote for with regards to Georgia Film Critics Association today, if the voting was today, as well as a bunch of content after the Atlanta Film Festival. This is Brian Scuttle. Thank you very much for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com.